The forest stood like a wall, resin thick, old enough to remember names nobody used anymore. Phones lost their bars the way travelers lost their nerve. News came here like rain on slate, hit, beat it, slid off the edge, gone. Between spruce trunks and amber mist pulled in hollows, and if you tilted your head you could hear a rough whisper, as though the trees were elderly neighbors discussing business they didn't want overheard. An old police van heaved over a root and nosed into a clearing. A farmhouse hunched there beside a leaning barn. The fence looked like a row of crooked crosses hammered into damp dirt. On the porch waited a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, grey at the temples, eyes that measured more than they judged. Richard. Behind him stood his wife Margaret, hair wound tied further back to men built square as beams, Thomas and Edward, the kind who learned the length of a task by how it felt in their backs. They brought a young man from the van. He gripped the metal lip as if it might buckle under him. He blinked hard at the thin daylight. Short beard the colour of rainwater, lips gone pale, eyes fixed on a point past anyone's shoulder. He didn't speak. His name they found in a worn wallet. Michael, the signature curling like a vine and refusing to stop where it should. Delivery, the driver said, passing a creased form. Supervision required. Doesn't talk. Leave him, Richard said. The forest will teach. A tin cup appeared in Michael's hand. The water tasted of iron and pine. He drank and clung to silence like armor. Behind it he hid what city life had carved into him. Debts that called at dawn, a quick profit dream that burned down to filament, the dry laughter of men who loved interest more than sleep. He had fled the stairwells that echo, the messages that ping like gnats. He had pretended, in the trees, that his tongue had stopped working. The police labelled him simple and brought him to the address that takes such people in. Bathhouse, Richard told his sons. Then food. The place stirred like a hive. A clean shirt, a bowl of thick breathing steam. Bread whose crust still held the heat of morning. Children peeking over the backs of chairs, the sideways glance that weighs a stranger. The farmstead made room the way a stern family does, with suspicion, yes, but with order. The forest hummed around them, letting no signal pass. Here, what got caught wasn't news. It was people. Morning began with water. The well's sweep croaked, the rope sang, the bucket kissed stone with a hollow clack. On the sills, Margaret laid out herb bundle street. John's word, yarrow, meant thumbs quick, precise, never wasting emotion. Thomas and Edward drifted to animals and wood, and to that third task no one names, being present with your body until evening sets your shoulders down. Children slipped through currant bushes and returned with mouths purpled to the edges. The day had clocks no one saw. The scent of raw earth meant garden, the hard crosswind meant roof, the first cold star meant prayer. They gave Michael the jobs for quiet hands: carry water, stack branches, shift baskets from shade to sun. He did them quickly, without the theatre of incompetence. He matched the rhythm. He learned the weight of a task in his palms and the permission in a nod. If anyone spoke near him, it was a dark-haired girl with attentive eyes and careful, steady hands, the hands of someone who has broken things and regretted it. Emily. 5 years earlier they had brought her here out of trouble, a settlement where weekends were sirens, a stepfather who drank, a two-room history that smelled of old beer and rain through a cracked window. Emily had anchored herself with herbs and river work, but a certain economy in her walk betrayed the memory of sidewalks and reflections that promised the future to anyone with bus fare. They speak only what must be said here, she told him, pushing a fistful of mint into a pail. A word is a nail. Once you drive it, it stays. Michael nodded. He nearly smiled and remembered. A mute shouldn't have comebacks that land on time. He stowed the smile. Does he truly not speak? Margaret asked from the doorway, not unkind, just exact. He doesn't, Emily said, but he hears. At day's end Margaret murmured a short prayer that used no names, as if naming tempted the house to replace people with their useful silhouettes. Richard sat at the corner and watched Michael the way a man watches whether not to change it, only to read it. Each time his gaze lingered, something flickered behind his eyes, a small, disobedient recognition that slid away. The mole by Michael's ear, the habitual rub at his brow when he was lost for words. Coincidence? Richard told himself. The forest reflects. It lets you see what you brought. At night Michael whispered to keep his tongue from rusting. Daniel, Jack, Sarah. Borrowed names so his own wouldn't wake and call attention. He thought of his wife in the city grey sand, shoved the image aside like a spark on a wool coat. While you're here, he told himself, you have no one. You are blank. Live small. The farm's rules were called that's how. Those who bent became part of the hive, the ones who bristled either snapped or slipped into the trees and let the dark judge them. Leaving rarely worked. The forest held. Thomas and Edward taught Michael to stand in line step, shoulder, rhythm, the kind of labour that erases your edges and gives back a steadier outline. Emily taught him remedies. Which leaf coaxed sleep, which root cooled a fever, which flower kept a panic from turning into a storm you couldn't row across. She touched stems with respect. He watched her hands and understood a grammar that needed no dictionary. People arrived sometimes the way rain does unannounced. Accept it. A girl with her braid cut off, found whispering to parsley after a week. A boy who'd stolen a moped, taught the density of wood until he said I understand like a man who'd paid a fine. An old man with rope marks at the wrist who needed a day of silence and then wanted tea. People were keys. Some turned clean, some snapped and left the jagged tooth inside the lock. Michael turned. His silence began to sound not like a stage trick but like listening. He noticed how Margaret placed her palm against the Evans flank as if checking its breath, how Thomas measured a log with his eyes before the first swing, how Richard set his hand on the window ledge before prayer, testing not the seal's level but the houses. Yet another life grew inside Michael like a second root. At dusk, when tasks loosened and the day unbuttoned itself, Emily whispered, in the city the night smells like hot bread from the all-nighter. Do you remember? He nodded. I do. The city had not forgotten him. His name haunted spreadsheets and message threads, annotated with debts, deadlines, promises that had not survived contact with sunrise. Grace stopped answering unknown numbers, closed the door to their rented place, slept on a friend's couch. Messages bred like fruit flies. Seen him. Where? The forest ate them. Two men from town followed a rumor down the logging road. They asked for directions and water, and with their eyes asked whether this was a place that answered. Richard poured water into chipped enamel, pointed toward the road they already knew, and waited until brush closed behind them like a book. That evening he sat longer than usual on the porch. Suspicion squatted on his shoulder like a tame crow. He had heard a new footstep in the tree's light, not animal. The rain that came didn't cleanse, it repeated. A patient wetness knit from fine thread. Emily woke to a sound like grain sliding in a wooden throat. She walked barefoot to the window and saw Richard crossing the yard without a coat, not toward the barn, not to the well, but to a door set flush in the house's flank, a door whose iron hook was polished by use. Morning divided tasks like bread. Margaret sent Emily to the river with sheets, big work that rinsed thought. Thomas took a lantern to the blowdowns. Edward muttered about his back and stayed near the harness. Richard went to what he called the border, a tangle of old cuts, deer paths, and his own private patrol lines. When the yard emptied, Michael laid his palm on the iron hook. The wood carried a varnish of old hands. The lock was new and careful. He listened the way you listen for a sleeping child's breath. He lifted. A narrow stair fell into dark that smelled of metal and earth. At the bottom, something glinted dully as if a moon were wrapped in tin. The chest wasn't pretty. It was work. Thick bands, corners armoured, rust that looked painted on. Sacks leaned against it. Crates showed bottle ribs. Michael crouched and touched the lock with 2 fingers just to teach his body where the weight lived. He didn't pull or rattle. He closed, hooked, climbed, and stepped into the grey yard with the same pace head gone down. Emily waited by the corner, hair strung with river. You saw, she said. I did. There's money in it, she said, certainty quiet as a knife. Gold, too. He keeps it the way animals keep fat for winter. How do you know? Everything else is on display. Fire sleeps in the low places. Michael studied her eyes and saw not greed, but a muscle memory called chance. Take it and the line of your life might bend toward light. I left a wife in the city, he said, because truth demanded a toll. Grace. And I left myself, Emily said. No one owns me. If I go with resources. Resources sounded like a bird from another latitude. We can't leave as 3, he said. We leave as 2, she said, with a glance as quick as a bird stealing bread. Don't call me foolish. If done foolish, in practicing alive. Plans prefer schedules to speeches. The farm's schedule was iron, theirs would be too. They needed a night when Thomas took the far border and returned with first light, when Edward drank his back tea and slept, when Margaret read long because the little ones coughed, when Richard walked the fence lines bareheaded in drizzle. The lock was new, so the key was near. Men like Richard wore keys close, on cords, undershirts. You could steal a chest, but keys are people. Too loud to carry it, Michael said. We'd wake the house. Then the key, Emily counted. We watch him undress. He keeps his shirt on even by the oven. He goes out in rain, she smiled. Rain makes everything slip. They laughed softly. On this farm, laughter was as intimate as a secret. That was when Lily stepped through the story, as if the doorway had been waiting for her silhouette. Long-legged, scarfed to bright for the palette of the yard. A visitor from the settlement who came for herbs and left with a look that said, I know something about this place you don't. She appeared beside Richard when he opened the basement door that night, carrying a lamp whose light pulled iron from shadow. I knew the night would choose you both, she said, mild as a teacher. Leave, Emily breathed. This isn't yours. Hey, Richard said, not raising his voice. Well, talk like people. They came down, Richard first, Lily behind, lamp painting gold on the bands. Richard looked at the chest like a keeper looks at a quiet cat, alert, unexcited, fond without sentiment. I expected better, he told Michael. Especially from you. Michael let the pretense fall like a wet coat. You know my name, he said. I knew it in the bones before the mouth, Richard said. 27 years ago, they took a boy to a home. I walked my steps to dust. The forest took me and made me house. You arrived with the same small mole, the same hand to the brow when words hide, and the same want to take. I want to live, Michael said, and take Emily with me. To help yourself, Richard corrected. Emily is better at locks than you are. I chose, Emily said. Lily watched the board, amused by how serious these pieces were about their rules. He your son? She asked. He's my knife, Richard said. Held by the handle or by the blade? That's the question. Poetry, Lily replied. He's a person? Before anything could harden further, a child cried upstairs, a thin, ragged sound that cuts through any philosophy. Margaret called Richard's name. He flinched. The key clinked against the band. Out, he told Michael and Emily. We'll finish later. The house shifted into its other body. Water feet. The small scream of steam when thrown on flame. A smolder at the attic corner, drowned quick. Below, the lock remained a lock. Plans are sugar in rain. When smoke thinned and buckets rolled under benches, Michael said, simply, I speak. We heard, Richard said. Now we speak true. Truth did as truth does. It failed to rescue anyone. Richard's voice found the word son without wearing it. Michael found debt without giving it teeth. Emily said free and meant I won't be furniture in this room, even if I love its light. Headlights whispered against the barn. Gravel sighed. Two men came in with the pasture of those who think smiling is a leak in the roof. A third followed, less face than smell the stairwell stink of cheap smoke and Sunday hallway talk. Once he had called himself partner. He had come to collect. Him here, Michael said, stepping into the wet night. Not hiding. How much? He asked when faces arranged themselves into numbers. So much, the first said and named a figure as if the mouth were a measuring cup. I'll repay, Michael said. Not tonight. Tonight you return yourself, the second said. We'll price the rest later. Richard stood with Thomas and Edward like a wall that didn't need a warning sign. Margaret hovered, a flame with nowhere to warm. Emily held nothing in her hands and still looked as if she could carry three things at once. Lily melted into shadow, an idea that hadn't chosen a host. You coming? The partner asked. Michael looked at trees, then at Richard. No nod, no shake. A mouth that had bent its strength inward. I'm coming, Michael said. Don't, Emily said, then softer, please. He went. Some bridges charged tolls served at the next table over. The car bit the road and disappeared. The house resumed breathing. Emily stared where the taillights had been until blankness filled that space, then turned to Richard. You let him go. I didn't hold him, Richard said. He's not a tree. He's my knife. Knives become scissors when there's more to cut, Lily murmured. Speak plain, Margaret said. We're tired. The city greeted Michael the way it greets those who arrive carrying only a name, with damp tunnel air, reflections that multiply you into uncertainties, and a chorus of who are you to me. They sat him at a scuffed table in an empty apartment with a bottle of water, a stack of papers, and a notebook freckled with sums and deadlines. "You pulled," the partner said, almost gentle. "Now you're pulled. Give me a day," Michael said, "to not die." They gave him half. He visited old addresses, digital, brick, underbridge, empty wallets, keys that had been doors and were now opinions, chats that had turned mausoleum. He called Grace and got rings, then a recorded kindness, then the luxury of silence. He nearly wrote him sorry and understood he was, mostly, sorry for himself. Evening brought the table back. "Well?" the partner asked. "I can't find all," Michael admitted. "I know where to find enough." "Where?" "Where the signal goes to die." They laughed because believing costs. "Your forest," the first said. "There's nothing there." "There's a chest," Michael said. "Old coin, old paper, older decisions. Enough if we're quiet as dust." They drove. The road unspooled, black and wet. The forest tipped its fog aside a finger width. Not welcome, not warning. Richard waited on the porch like a man set at the edge between two worlds. "I need the key," Michael said, and the house's silence. "I am the key," Richard said. "The house is the silence." He stood, come down into the breath-fed smells of iron. The chest, the cord at Richard's throat. "Tell me the why," he said softly. "Not the easy one." "So I can pay," Michael said, "and then go." "Where to?" "Where I'm not a debt." "That place is a story we tell scared men," Richard said, almost kind. "We are always owed and owing to ourselves, to others, to God, to the dirt that grows our food. Pick your currency. It's blood or time." He turned the key. The chest exhaled a museum. Pouches tied with twine. Old coins the color of bruised apples. Bills that powdered the air with the smell of closets. Papers that radiated a power older than signatures. Wealth always has to owe design and paper dust. "Take enough to leave alive," Richard said. "Leave enough so I don't turn beast." "You aren't a beast," Margaret said from the stairs. "We become beasts," he said. "Silence teaches you your voice, and it isn't always kind." Michael lifted what he dared. He saw, as if on a table, the on-ramp, the bridge, the apartment door that would open or wouldn't, depending on the weight in his pocket. Then Lily moved. "I'm leaving too," she said. "With him?" "No," Richard said. "You and his road don't match." "I'm kin to the road gold takes," she said, reaching. Richard's hand closed on her wrist with the calm inevitability of a habit learned before language. She twisted. Thomas stepped. Edward swung the lamp. The struggle was quick and metallic, a page torn out cleanly. "Stop," Michael told himself, because he recognized the exact shape of too late. Lily went down with a breath that sounded more offended than hurt. She looked at Michael and smiled with one corner, still elegant. "See," she whispered. "The key is a person." They brought her outside. The river had become a strip of black silk. Edward held her lightly, as one holds something that might choose its own ending. Thomas stood like a milestone. Margaret turned away and pressed her knuckles to her teeth. "Don't," Michael said. "We must," Richard said. "Water keeps secrets better than anyone." She didn't fight. The river took her with a practiced tenderness, made one ring like a coin dropped in a well, and went back to being a river. "You killed her," Emily said, voice so small it could hide in a sleeve. "We ended a conversation," Richard said. "Otherwise it never ends." Michael knew then that the road he'd traced in his mind had been drawn in chalk under a nightly tide. The chest, the city, the arithmetic that paid for a future, they were stories with the wrong tense. "Am I your son?" he asked, because if a thing must be cut, better a clean cut. "You're my knife," Richard said again, softer. "Then cut me." "I already am," Richard said, and did what he believed a man does when the house requires it. No shouting, no robe and gavel. A gesture smooth with practice, a line closed the way a book is closed when the last word has no echo left. Michael folded the way a man finally figures out how to kneel. A wet star shook above him. He thought of Grace, who would never smell him in a doorway again. He thought of Emily, who spoke to plants as if they might answer if addressed politely. He thought of Margaret, who tested the oven like a pulse. He thought of the man the world had placed above, beside, and inside him and then turned into a wall. He thought that maybe network meant roots more than wires. Then he lay down, and the forest did what it had been doing the whole time. It kept. Morning arrived reluctantly, dragging a sheet of fog. Margaret sat at the table, palms to her temples as though holding a bowl that might otherwise tip. Thomas sharpened a knife he did not need to sharpen. Edward adjusted a harness that would fit whether he adjusted it or not. Emily stood at the window facing the river. She did not cry. A new alignment had hardened inside her, a balance that asked no permissions. "He was your son," she said when Richard came in with River in the creases of his cuffs. "He was my knife," Richard said, and for the first time something cracked in the voice that had made rules sound like weather. "No," Emily said. "He was a person." "You can go," Richard told her after a time. "Now?" "I want," she said. The hopeful go. "I'm done hoping. I'll do." "What will you do? Live? Without you? Or with you?" "But not for you." She passed him without touching. Her steps used a network the house didn't know how to catch. Margaret lifted her head. "We prayed for the night to pass," she said softly. "It passed. Now we will pray for the day to begin." Thomas laid the knife flat. Edward stopped in the doorway. They waited for Richard to be what he had been, a sequence of clean gestures that add up to a life. He didn't move. He sat with his hand on the table the way he set it on the window ledge before prayer and waited for something inside to level. "Well, bury," he said at last. "And then well live." "The chest?" Thomas asked. "It stays. To remember the price." "The price of what?" Emily asked without turning. "What we call a home," Richard said. "Weeks turn to months the way rain turns to rot and then to growth." Sometimes a car from the city appeared on the logging road and came as near as strangers dare. The farm showed them what farms show: bread on a board, water climbing out of a hole in the ground, children whose mouths stain purple in summer. It showed them order and a gravity that can't be taught by words. It never showed them the night the river kept one and the earth another. Emily did her work. Herbs, water, the light touch that takes fever's hand and leads it outside. At dusk, she walked to the ragged edge of old cuts and listened for the shiver of highway. She always returned, not because the house had claws, but because she had set her anchor somewhere the house couldn't reach. Richard aged in measures that aren't years, by how rarely he walked the borderlines, by how often he sat at the window and watched the place where the path bends. Sometimes he saw a figure there, a narrow shoulder, a small mole by the ear. He didn't call. He spoke names less and less. One afternoon he opened the chest, lifted a single pouch, and carried it to the river. He sat until dusk and watched the water draw the salt from the ground with a patience he recognized. "Do you hear?" he asked the river. "I paid. I don't know with what. I don't know to whom. But I paid." At night Margaret read the short prayer. The house breathed with her. Thomas and Edward listened to the oven tick as it gave back its heat to the room. Emily lay down last and listened for a chain rattling in some neighbor's barn that didn't exist. Memory makes its own noises. The chest remained not curse, not salvation, a scale. Anyone who went down after that night understood with the skin on the soles of their feet. Wealth is always paid for in advance by someone, somewhere, with a currency that isn't printed. The forest never released a signal, but sometimes it released a person. Rarely. Those who left carried their debts like names they might change, but could not escape. Those who stayed learned the grammar of quiet. In the quiet you could hear the well's sweet hoist a voice from the ground. The house lay its palm on the sill, and someone in the dark whisper, "Daniel, Jack, Sarah," not to remember, but to keep the tongue bright. One day, because people prefer stories to silences, someone will say the farm was a legend. They'll argue under televisions tuned to loud. Was Michael truly Richard's son? Did Lily exist? Did Emily weigh a house against the word free and choose neither? The forest won't answer. It has its own network, slow, sticky, invisible, that holds not headlines but cost. If a stranger with a short beard and a small mole near his ear ever walks the path and pauses before he knocks, the house will not shudder. It will breathe evenly. It will know the figure and not the name. And it will remember the price. The river, whose memory is perfect for what it keeps, will go on forgetting out loud.